Okay, today we'll be demoing concrete mold making using this XPS insulation foam. Okay, so what we're thinking about is making a negative, or making a positive version for a negative mold, right? These are the basic things you'll need: a ruler, some petroleum jelly or adhesive, tape, definitely a box cutter, 2 of these buckets, some hot glue, obviously some concrete, and some gloves. Okay, let's see here. So I already cut out my pieces, but I can generally show you guys how easy it is to cut a piece of this green foam here. Definitely would use a straight edge because it's not as easy to get a straight line as you think it is. I would suggest not cutting this in one pass, or else you'll get a little bit of chunkiness in the sides, kind of like how I got here. You cut it in multiple passes. So you never want to pour your concrete mold directly on to your surface. You want to have a base plate. So that's why I'm going to be using this as my base plate. I wrote bottom on the bottom of it. Putting hot glue basically on the whole bottom surface of this thing. And squishing it down to the bottom. So as you can see, this is going to be the edges of clearance for my concrete mold. You want to have at least ½ an inch of clearance all around for concrete. General rule of thumb, just for this scale, or else it'll get really fragile and it could break apart when you're demolding, and that's just not fun. Okay. Also, what you can do, like what I did for these pieces, is I use this spray adhesive to get all the pieces to laminate together. And then you can either use this knife, or you can use a Surform. You can use a Surform or some sandpaper. You can even use some of the sanders in the wood shop, like the belt sander or the orbital sander is what I used here to get a really smooth surface. I'm going to use tape on the inside edges of the mold to prevent leakage, as opposed to if you were to just stick these on the edges and put tape on this outside wall, then you'll risk having a leakage go through here. So I'll show you what that means. This is a little long. Not very well. Okay, so this is what I mean by taping on the inside wall. You'll have less likely to have leakage right here. Oh, thank you. And remember, whatever you put on the inside of this mold is going to show up. So I'm not sure, but I have a feeling that even these little tape lines might show up on my mold when I'm done. Which is fine, because this is a sample, right? So we're just trying to get to learn the material and how it works. All right, it's important to take your time when you're preparing your mold, because like you mentioned in class, the main time and attention that you need to pay when you're mold making is the prep work of the mold. The fun and quick part is just pouring the concrete into it. I'm definitely going to line the creases and the edges with the tape, just to be safe, because the last thing we want is for this thing to pop open So what I'm doing here is I'm just lining the inside of my seams with this tape, basically just as a preventative measure, so there's no leakage, which I fear there might be, because a big part of this is making sure that your measurements of your walls are good, so that you don't have any leakage. If you do, I can tell you how to fix that, because that might happen to us here. And that's okay, we're getting to know the material. I might, as a preventative measure, even tape the outside. Okay, I think we might be ready. So I made a form that I want to have a through side. So by doing that, you can have your inside form. So here's the outside, the inside form. If it comes past your upper wall, then you'll get a through negative space like this one here. So let's see. Okay, next we're gonna mix our concrete. Actually, no, what we need to do. So this is basically gonna be our releasing agent. You wanna put something on your mold material before you pour the concrete out, just so it releases better. We're gonna be using Vaseline petroleum jelly. You don't need to buy this because we usually have some in the studio. I'm just gonna use my finger. You can use a paintbrush if you want. But if you do use a paintbrush, then it's harder kind of to know where you've already done it, because you're not feeling it directly with your fingers. You can use gloves if you don't like the feeling of this on your fingers. Okay, I'm gonna grab a paper towel before I put the gloves on. Okay, now it's time to mix our concrete. You always want to wear gloves, because if you get concrete, cement on your hands, you won't feel it immediately, but it is a corrosive material and you're basically going to be burning your skin. It's not super bad, you're not going to die from it, but it could hurt, and it really irritates my skin personally, so I always wear gloves when I'm using concrete. You want to have anchoring cement, not quick setting cement. The difference is anchoring cement will set in about 20 minutes and quick setting will take 24 hours. But with this anchoring cement setting within 20 minutes, your work time is really about 10 minutes. So by the time we get this stuff in here and start mixing it, you want to get it in your mold as soon as possible. A good tip to calculating your concrete, honestly, there's concrete calculators online where you can Google it. It's usually free. And basically all you do is put in the dimensions of the volume that you're going to be filling, and it'll tell you how many ounces or milliliters of concrete that you need to use. I'm gonna try to just overshoot it here, just to be safe. We're gonna be mixing up a fairly wet mixture here, but it's still very, very easy to get your concrete too wet. And when it's too wet, it's honestly pretty difficult to get it more dry. So you always wanna be adding water to concrete, not concrete to water. And you do it a little bit at a time. I'm gonna be using one of these rubber, what is this called? A rubber spatula. You wanna have the vents on when you're doing it. I just have them off right now so you guys can hear me. You wanna make sure you scrape the edges because there's always a little bit of dry stuck in those corners. We want to mix this to the consistency of cake batter, essentially, or pudding. Switch to a piece of wood to make sure you can actually scrape it all out. Sometimes that spatula doesn't get it all. Sometimes you can see the dry material on the sides still stuck there. What does it look like? It's honestly better to be doing this slowly, adding more water than adding way too much at first. Thing, you know, see how I'm like spilling a little bit on the table and kind of getting it everywhere. Don't clean it up when it's wet. You want to wait until it sets because it's so much easier to just scrape off concrete than it is to try and get it up with a sponge. Okay. Now you want to kind of, when you're pouring it, you want to kind of start in the corners of your mold and not just pour directly onto your form that's in the middle here. It's a little chunky. Yikes, we need more. So try not to do what I did and not mix up enough. It'll be fine, but I thought I overshot it. Also, basic safety, you always want to wear safety glasses. I forgot. So do as I say and not as I do. Teresa. It's a big ass mold. Okay, doesn't look like we have any leaks. So you can kind of vibrate your mold to get the air bubbles to come out. I already see some coming out. Do this. It's not that important for this because it is a sample. I will show you though, if we had any leaks, say like one of my seams right here busted, you can take some of this plasticine, which lives in a black and red container at the back right corner of the sculpture room. It's basically just oil-based clay that never dries out. It'll feel really hard when you first get it out, but it gets more plastic with heat, so just kind of play with it in your fingers a little bit. But say this seam right here had busted and concrete started leaking, you could just take this and shove it in that seam and it would stop the leak. Okay, I'm gonna let this sit for, it says 20 minutes, but I'm gonna let it sit for about 30 minutes just to make sure while I talk to you guys about basic cleanup of your concrete. While it's curing, it might feel hot, like it might feel stiff and done already, but if it's a little warm to the touch, I would still leave it a little bit. If you have a little bit of concrete left in your container, you can scrape it out into the trash can. But once you do that, you want to leave a bulk of this thin film of concrete on the edges of your container in the container, and you'll get it and crack it out when it's dry. Or you can wash it out. Do not pour concrete directly in the sink because it activates with water. You'll literally clog the concrete or clog the sink with concrete. But there's a bucket in the sink in here that's going to be filled with water, and it's just for cleaning out your concrete buckets. It might look a little nasty, but still do not pour any concrete water down the sink.